The only time it makes sense to scale is if you add that new location, is it going to be more profitable than the current ones? If it's going to be less profitable, then something's broken, right?
Part of being an entrepreneur is to just learn to enjoy the journey, enjoy the struggle better throughout this process. And when you get to this hiring ops and like now day-to-day revenue is not required to be on you, that doesn't necessarily mean it's passive take-home income. And it can be if you want to make it like that. But like I would argue, I'm not involved in the day-to-day, but I'm still working 40 plus hours a week because I want to see growth. I want to continue pushing, right? And so you can that's a really sweet spot here in my opinion. Today's topic is how do we expand our moving company? Because there's a life cycle of moving company growth that we want to be pertinent about or understand. On top of that, how do we expand and how do we think about this as a business with profit, loss, and equity structure? But also, how do we think about it when it comes to operations, how we actually operate? Structure, it can be different than how we operate. And then from there, how does marketing come into play? And that's why I'm here today, is because I want to share the marketing side and have a really good conversation with you guys, with Brock, about how marketing and operations can come together to help you grow and be profitable. So that's what we're going to do today. Brock is going to enter us into like the life cycle, and we're going to just share a little bit about the life cycle of a moving company. And I think that's it. Let's rock and roll. Brock, take it away.
That was a great setup. Man, that was a great setup. I'm guessing a lot of people that are going to be here and listening to this they either own moving companies or eventually, they're going to be starting moving companies or whatever, and they're listening to you and your content because they want to get a leg up. And so I really think that this conversation we're going to have is very good for the people that are thinking of scaling, and especially the people that are getting towards that plateau and they have to make a decision on what they're going to do to grow, right? Mm-hmm. And I do think that through our conversations, even a little bit that you and I talked about before and previously, I think it's going to save a lot of people money and make a lot of people money, which is really what our goal is, right?
Yeah, we had a great conversation before this even started, and there was even just tension in what we were wanting from to see. And so I think this is perfect because as business owners, we live in tension.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, well, I'll get started. So the idea is we always want to, how do I share my screen here? We always want to start with where a moving company starts, right? And so if you guys own a moving company, this is going to make a ton of sense to you, and I guarantee you're going to agree on all this stuff, okay? And if you're just getting started, you're going to get a glimpse into the future, okay? So as moving companies start, right, inevitably, unless you start with a lot of capital, inevitably you start on the trucks, right? You're moving people, you're taking sales calls at the same time, you're doing dispatch, you're working through claims, you're doing literally everything. And that's the only way to get from point A to point B, is to do it all. And when you're doing that, you're also learning about what not to do, how to do it right? Again, if you're just starting, I'm gonna say that while you go through this hard startup phase, document everything, because eventually you're going to want it as SOP, standard operating procedures, right? So that you can replicate it, right? And as an entrepreneur, what I've realized is, more than anything, an entrepreneur is somebody that is building a business thinking of, how am I doing this task right now so that eventually I can have someone else do it, right? That's really the bread and butter of what an entrepreneur does, is document this stuff so they can do it and then give it to somebody else to rinse and repeat, right? So you're building up your company, you're on the trucks, you're doing everything, all right? And usually the next step, or at least what we recommend the next step being, is you as the owner get off the trucks, right? You move to the office. You truly become an entrepreneur instead of a solopreneur, right? And you start to have people help you. You start to grow the business a little bit, right? And the problem is, if you're still on the trucks, you'll find this out when you get to the office, right? The problem is, all of a sudden you turn from a revenue generating employee that's doing a million things at once and just maximizing your ROI to relinquishing some of that ROI, because now you're paying somebody to do a job that you were doing so that you can focus on tasks that are eventually revenue generating, right? But it has a timeline to it, right? If you're direct labor, you work, you get paid, right? The company gets paid revenue. But when you're doing sales, now you have 1, 2, 3 month lag, right? You're doing operations that are not revenue generating. They just help you generate revenue. Okay, there's a difference. And so we see this peak right before you move to the office. You move to the office, you start focusing on sales and ops, and earnings drop off a little bit, right? But you have to do that so you can continue to scale. So then we start to see earnings going up a little bit, right? Until you get to the point where you say, okay, I'm sick of doing sales calls, right? I want to get somebody that can come in and do the sales calls for me so I can focus on operations and focus on getting the company, more profitable and more streamlined and start building SOPs and whatever. So you hire a salesman, right? And right then, right, you were doing all the sales, you hire a salesman, now you're paying money, your earnings drop, right? But it allows you to make more revenue and more earnings. And so they drop it first. As that salesperson learns, understands the script and whatever, the company begins to earn more revenue or earn more earnings, right? So this is just the life cycle of a business. It's this continual peak and valley, right? We just never want the valleys in each phase to be less than the valley of the previous phase, right? That's not a good place to be.
Oh, that's a good point. I never heard that. I like that. So, and when you say that, so you got your major expenses here is like now you're hiring people, right?
Mm-hmm.
More consistently. So now you're going to see profitability drop. Now, revenue may still be going up during this whole time. So we're talking more profitability here,
earnings, right? You got it. Net operating
take home. I can spend my money at home type earnings, right? So it's dropping here because obviously you're hiring people. There's some software you're probably investing into.
CRM,
and then your profit goes up because your revenue now goes up and you're able to do more volume than when you were by yourself.
You got it. You got it.
So now your sales, you hire your salesperson and now your profitability comes back down because you've now made this investment of the salesperson and you've got to then get profitability up by getting more volume.
100%. You hire the salesman, right? And now you can do more because now you can focus on efficient operations, right? You can focus on working on your marketing and getting different marketing sources or going out and networking or getting realtor connections or whatever, right? But you didn't have time to do that before because you're running ops, you're running sales, you're running dispatch, you're running everything, right?
Yep.
So we're buying our time, right? As an entrepreneur, we're just buying our time, right? And so inevitably, right, we want to buy more time, and so we hire ops. And so now we truly have a moving company that can relatively run on its own, in that the owner is not needed day to day to facilitate revenue. The owner now turns into that visionary, right? That can start looking to say, all right, what's the next 3 steps? And we're getting out of the survival stage. How can we actually profit and thrive, right?
Yeah. Can I just say something real quick on that?
May.
I'd like to just encourage people that process takes years. It's very difficult unless you are coming in the game with money, which I never got that opportunity to. That takes years to do. And so this is a process. It's a journey. And part of being an entrepreneur is to just learn to enjoy the journey, enjoy the struggle better throughout this process. And when you get to this hiring ops and like now day-to-day revenue is not required to be on you, that doesn't necessarily mean it's passive take-home income. And it can be if you want to make it like that. But like I would argue, I'm not involved in the day-to-day, but I'm still working 40 plus hours a week because I want to see growth. I want to continue pushing, right? And so you can that's a really sweet spot here, in my opinion, is when you're out of the day-to-day and you get to choose, am I going to be out of the day-to-day for a lot of this so I can just have this like passive, more passive generating income, or am I going to be out of the day-to-day so I can grow more? Would you agree with that?
100%. 100%, right? You're turning into the visionary, and now you're trying to say what's going to happen in the next 5 years, right? As an entrepreneur right now of the owner and founder of ProMover, I'm saying what's AI going to be doing in the accounting world over the next 5 years, and how can we leverage it now, right? What software's coming out, what procedures are coming out that we can leverage, even though we're not going to implement it tomorrow, right? But I have to be in that mindset because that's the future, right?
Yep.
And that's where the moving company entrepreneur is now. Where this next phase is, okay?
XYZ looks scary, whatever that is.
XYZ is very scary. And you're right. It's very scary because this is where things happen or don't happen, right? This is where a lot of moving company owners get burnt out. They plateau. They don't know what's next. Sometimes, depending on how the I shouldn't even say seasonality, depending on how the economy works, right? Your company may pull back a little bit. Now, you're struggling. What are you going to do about that? And with that, I'll also say the biggest trap that keeps moving company owners stuck in this plateau is related to the earnings of the individual owner, right? Because as this progression climbs, inevitably we start seeing the owner take more and more money, okay? And they're taking a good salary, maybe even more than what it would cost to replace them in the business. They're taking a lot of the earnings out. And so every time you take earnings out, you're eating the children of your earnings, right? And so
you sound just like my guy who's like, hey, you're pulling, it's my business. I'll pull what I want to pull out.
yeah, I get you. And that's totally fine. The problem is inevitably the economy shifts, right? And now if your revenue drops 10%, I got this happening with a client right now. They were making a bunch of money, for in relation to the average moving company, but then their revenue drops a little bit. The economy shifts, depending on where you live, and all of a sudden you're trying to stay living on that earning that you were taking, but the company can't afford that, and now you start to struggle, right? And so this is a very, very critical point for a lot of people, right? Now, we're not going to talk through the pros and cons of earning, pulling out all your earnings as draws and blah, blah, blah. What we're going to talk about is what you can do from here, right? What you can do from here, number one, is you can hunker down and remove your overhead cost and try to maximize your profit margin, which you should be doing all the time, perpetually anyway. But another option is to grow, okay? Now, two areas of growth. A lot of times, here's where we'll see people buy warehouses. Okay, and I know that there's a number of people that have warehouses that do storage, and that's great. But I want to challenge you to by saying your revenue from storage needs to be 20% in excess of the cost of the storage. Right? I see so many moving companies that are not making any money on storage compared to what they're spending, or they're actually losing money on storage. And so I say this to say, I see a lot of moving companies think that it's really sexy to get a warehouse, but in reality, it does cost a lot of money, and it potentially limits your growth. So I'm just saying, be smart about it and make sure you're making money on storage. Okay.
Yeah, I've actually heard on the other side too that there's a lot of people that are trying to get rid of their warehouse because it's just a overhead and a burden. And where we're going, we're about to see here, it kind of feels like by avoiding the warehouse, we actually potentially pick up time back. If we put some of us in our business models, warehouse is not worth it just to have storage, because the cost, the time, the demand, the training that comes operationally to be able to do forklifts and all that stuff. It's like, well, what if we just skip the warehouse segment and move on to the growth segment?
Yeah. And some people argue that it allows them to get more sales. And sometimes I do think that's correct. But most of the time I do argue against that, to say, immaterially, it does help. There are some sales that you get because you do keep storage, but you're competing. Okay, I'm gonna hold on this for 1 second. 10 to 15 years ago, private equity saw that there was a 10 cap on self-storage, and so they bought up. Private equity has bought up just Googles of square footage of storage, and private equity is fine with a 6 cap. Okay, and we won't go into what all that means, but the earnings,
less money taking home,
100%. And now a local moving company is trying to compete with that, and you just can't. You just can't, because you're selling the same thing they're selling, right? It's not like you're so much better than self-storage. Usually you're doing the same thing they are, and so the earnings, from what I've seen, usually aren't there. Sometimes it's necessary, and there's some people that do make some good money in it, I will say. All I'm saying is be smart about it, right? So I see a lot of people buy warehouses. I just want to make sure you're making money, okay? But the other side of that then is do more, right? Is get a new location. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today, because a new location sometimes is required, right? And sometimes it's not. So let's talk through when it makes sense and when it doesn't, right? So,
hey, and real quick, let's go back real quick. We do need, I love our conversations, but it really could be 2 hours, and I am going to try to end with plus or minus 10 minutes of the hour. So let's keep that in context. But before we go on, I do want to let Josh get his question answered. He said, what factor do you put in for truck parking and office storage? And I'm assuming that's in, Josh, maybe try to clarify, that's in tension of the be careful with the warehouse, or what is the, maybe you understand that question better.
I would
in the warehouse cost, he's saying, what factor do you put in for truck parking and office space?
Yeah, I want your storage to more than cover your warehouse and your office space and truck parking if you have, if it's all together, right? If it's rent of all of it, right? I want your storage to cover that. And what I will say, this varies by state, but I see a lot of people with a lot of success renting out especially with individual locations, renting out self-storage places. And if they do that, they can kind of arbitrage the cost of that with their storage, right? And usually parking trucks there is not super expensive. And so I really love that because they're always guaranteed to make a margin on storage because they're just billing more than they're making. The problem is when you have 15,000 square feet and you're only renting out 8, right? Now you have that delta that's negative. But either way, I always want storage to cover everything: warehouse, office space, and truck storage, and exceed it by 20%. Exceed that cost by 20%. Does that make sense? Travis, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Josh, let me know if that answers your question, but let's move on for speed.
Okay. So when do we start a new location? We do not start a new location.
Let's define a location real quick.
Okay. Great question. Let's define a location. When I'm speaking of locations, I'm speaking of physical dispatchable locations. Okay. Because we're going to talk about GMB here in a little bit and how important that is, but it is very different from a brick and mortar, right? A dispatchable location, right?
So for people listening real quick, especially those who bear the cost of listening to me here, when Brock is going through this stuff, he's talking about operational dispatch locations. He's got a purpose for that. When I talk, we're going to go into marketing locations, and we'll have a tension conversation about how to structure them together and what you need versus don't need. And so when we talk about located, we're talking dispatchable operational locations. Go for it.
Got it. Right. So the first thing I like to look at is most geography can handle a location doing 3 million in revenue. Okay. And I live in a small town. My small town of 20 some thousand people may not be able to handle 3 million in one location, but that's a very small town. Most locations can handle 3 million. And the reason I say that a location should get to 3 million before you look to start a new location is because if you can't get to 3 million, you might not, and I'll go to the next one here, you might not have your process refined or a proven customer acquisition method refined enough to prove that you can obtain sales at scale. Okay. If you're doing 1 to 1.5 million, there's probably a lot of referral stuff. People know your name, you're in the community, you're local, you've been there your whole life, whatever, right? That is not scalable. Okay. What is scalable is paid marketing sources that are repeatable, right? And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But the reason I say 3 million is kind of the minimum of where you want to be at a single location before you look to expand to new dispatchable locations is because I want that marketing to be able to be used and scaled in other locations. Okay, so we want to have 3 million in revenue-ish. We want to have that process, the process of dispatching and operations, right, refined so it's duplicable, right, so that you can take that, you have all the SOPs, you have everything, and you just put it into another location, okay? And I say that with a caveat of we always want to do more, not new. Okay, so if we can get to 3 million in one location relatively easy, then that 3 million minimum might actually be a 6 million minimum, right? We want to do everything that we can to maximize the revenue at one location because that's maximizing the efficiency of our overhead before we look to another location. Okay, we also want to be able to have a sales and ops process that can relatively be centralized. Okay, because the whole idea of having another physical location is to continue to make our overhead efficient, right? To continue to make everything efficient. I have a company that I want to say they're running 7 or 8 locations, and their sales commission percentage of the commission percentage of sales for their salesmen is 3%. Okay, that's very low. Usually we're seeing between 6 and 9% going to a salesman, right? Theirs is 3%. And why? How can they do 3%? Because they have so many quality leads flowing into their system that it's easy for a salesman to make 3% on their commission and still make a lot of money. And that guy makes a lot of money. So I'm saying that to say essential sales and ops needs to be scalable, right?
Yep.
And the last thing, I already mentioned this, but a proven customer acquisition method. We have to be able to go into new markets and get customer acquisition as opposed to rely on repeat and referral and just relationships, because that's not scalable, right? So
Yep.
now and I'm going to move kind of quick through this stuff, but before we start another location, what are some of the things we have to do? Well, the number one thing we have to do, let's assume you're over 3 million. You're like, hey, I'm getting capped out at where I'm at with what I can do. I have a proven system. I'm ready to expand. Before we go into another location, physical location, we have to do market research. Okay. And the number one thing is we have to see what competition is there. Okay. I don't see this a ton in the moving industry of people saying, you know what? The need is already met there. If I try to go into this location and I'm competing against a company that is class A, it's going to be really tough. And that need might not be there. And so if you're looking to expand in another location, make sure you're going to a place where there is a need to have a high quality moving company, or at least a need for whatever your niche is in your moving company, right? Whatever you focus on providing, right?
And before you move on, I do want to just add on a marketing side. If you're looking at, when we talk about it in a second, as a location, even if it's a real location, right? There is a opportunity to look at what does the marketing space look like, because one of your models is a proven acquisition model. So you look at your market space, you may have massive competitors in one area. Well, on let's say Google Maps, which drives the majority of your leads on the map rankings, you're going to have a huge uphill battle. Now you go 15 miles north, maybe it's still a good area, but the competitors, the big boys, the ones who have tons of reviews, may not be there. Their Google business profile may not look there. So there is a little bit of a market research just on a marketing side of things that you should investigate as well when choosing a location. I would argue it's not that important for a real dispatch operational location, but something to consider.
100%. And we'll talk about that in the next slide too, of how important that marketing is, because it is, it's very, very important. Obviously, lead acquisition is the most important part of a business, right? If you don't have sales, you don't have a business, right? We'll talk a little bit about corporate entity structure, but before you're getting into new locations, you need to know exactly how your corporate entity structure is going to be set up, okay? And again, we'll talk about locations as it relates to GMB as well as physical, domains. But I shouldn't even say domain, because that's an online term as well. But
be careful now.
A physical location. You want to have your equity structure set up so that you're limiting your potential liability, right? The point of an LLC, right? We don't want to pierce the veil. We'll talk about that in a minute. But you want to be set up to scale, because if you're starting one, you should go in with the idea of you're going to start more than one. Okay. If you're only planning to start one, then you need to adjust what your goals are, because it doesn't really make sense to only try to scale one time. Right. So, and we can talk about that another time. And the last thing related to this anyway is funding. Okay. We got to make sure that we have strong cash flow from our main entity, as well as working capital as it relates to what can I inject today into that company to get it started. And I at least want to have 6 months of overhead liquidity to be able to inject in that company, because you're probably going to be burning money for a while. You're going to be pumping money into marketing. You're going to be pumping money into training. You're going to be pumping money into new trucks or maybe even higher insurance rates and things like that, right? So you have to have I see so many companies that start a new location and they don't have that strong liquidity backing, and it's just too expensive and they shut it down. Whereas if they would have went in with a little bit more, they would have been able to see it through, right?
Yeah. This seems a little controversial. No debt in the parent company. I
hate debt, man.
This feels not right. You may hate debt. That's fine. But what about the people that don't hate debt? Like, to say no debt in the parent company before expanding, why do you have that view?
Yeah, 100%. Because...
And you can't say Dave Ramsey. That's not allowed.
Because debt kills your cash flow, right? And if all debt is kicking the can down the road, right? And my thought is, if you require debt to maintain operations in a company, then the cash flow isn't strong enough, right? I want your I'm going to go back one slide. Your company that's doing 3 million in revenue, it should be able to maintain a strong cash flow without having debt. If it requires debt, then the cash flow is not strong enough. And if the cash flow is not strong enough, then you're not going to be able to have enough liquidity to go into the next location. Because technically, you're going into the next location with debt, right? Because we see debt on a particular truck or whatever, but debt's on equity, right? Debt's on the balance sheet. And so if you have liquidity, it's debt. And I don't like debt. I've seen the companies that I see, I have never seen a company scale maximizing its or minimizing its debt to equity ratio. Never seen that. Yeah. Right? Companies that are strong have good cash flow and don't have debt. I'll just leave that there.
And we'll move on, but I was told to lean in on this on my side because one of the things that we see often at Rotate Digital, right? We've worked with over 350 moving companies at this point, and one of the hard things we see is sometimes you have really good businesses that have to stop their paid ads, their marketing, all the things that are going to help them grow and get past the debt, get past the negative cash flow as fast as possible. They have to stop because they lose cash flow, because it's suddenly now that $4,000 a month is now way too much for them, and they have to stop that, and they pull that back, and it's not neutral. And I think that's the unfortunate thing we see. It's not neutral. It's negative. It's not, all right, we'll just stop that. It's like, well, now you're slowing all momentum. You're delaying that positive cash flow down the line, which means you're increasing negative cash flow. It's a negative decision for you. Now, the hard part is we see people do this way more often than we'd like to see. So public service announcement here, really do try to lean into this wisdom that Brock's bringing here. You've got to have that cash. You've got to be prepared for everything to come, because the name of the game is how fast can we get out of the negative cash flow in this new location? Okay.
This is an impossible question for you to answer, but I would love to know how much money on average it would take to get within the top 3 of ranking. Obviously, it depends on your location, right? But let's say it's $60,000, let's say, right? Well, you need $60,000 of liquidity then to get there, right? And if you're doing it on debt, which we said if you have debt, any liquidity is debt, right? If you're doing it on debt, it's going to be much easier for you to say, you know what, I just don't have the cash flow to do it right now, as opposed to somebody that's not in debt. They have $60,000 and we're saying we're gonna put it in here because we believe that this works. We've seen that it works in our previous location. Let's say, our current location, we know it works, and so I'm putting 60 grand in there because I know that I'm going to get within the top 5, let's say, with $60,000. It's much different when you go into that mindset, and it's not a debt mindset, as opposed to, hey, every day when I see that money coming out of my account, it's debt that I'm raking up, right? There's a difference in that, and totally. There's just freedom in not having the debt. That's my thought.
And I will say this, because we do need to move on, because we have like 10 minutes or less and questions coming in, and we have a whole nother topic to hit. But I will say that the companies that have multiple locations, whether they're dispatch operationally or whether they're just marketing locations, right? They usually have a bigger brand value in the eyes of Google. And those are the ones that you can actually get up and running within 3 to 6 months, get in the top 3 and start seeing a return on investment. We had one guy start a location in Scottsdale, and within about 4 months, he was getting, roughly speaking, about an 8 times ROI from their spend on that specific location. That's phenomenal. Of course, now that was only about $12,000 of revenue for that 1 month, but you multiply that and you get good revenue. But we had another guy in Vegas get up and running, and within 3 weeks, top 3. So it all is dependent on your market and how strong your brand is. We've seen it go a year as well. So, all right, let's move on.
Yeah, it just depends on your location, right? I mean, if they're a strong competitor, it's much easier to get into a location where the Google rankings are garbage, and it's super easy for you to get in there and spend $12,000, you become top 3. Yeah, I mean, open a business there every day, right?
Exactly.
But again, before you start a new location, establish acquisition channel, right? You should know where you're putting your money for lead acquisition, what kind of acquisition you're going to do, what kind of marketing sources you're going to have, right? Because word of mouth does not scale. It's great and it's very necessary. It's hugely necessary, but it's not scalable, right? And so we have to figure out what the secret sauce is in our marketing spend. And again, that's why I say it's really important to, if you look at your location, look what the competition is, look at what the Google rankings are, and see if you can, with relatively low money, get into a top ranking. and goodness, you're set. And then the last thing, right, is testing it. I love when somebody's going into a new market, they've done all their market research, they're ready, and they put some money into it to see what's happening, right? I've had people where they're just pumping ads in a specific location and pumping money into GMB, just not even being able to service the moves, but just to see what's happening, see if what they believe is going to happen is actually happening. So
Interesting.
I've seen some cool success in that. So anyway, real quick, we'll talk about equity structure and we'll go from there. So most moving companies that we work with anyway, with one location, this is how they're set up, right? It's an S corporation, right? Single member, or it's a LLC with a S corporation designation, right? And the owner owns that, right? Or a couple owners own that. They're taking payroll out of here. Everything is run out of one location, okay? But whenever you start opening up multiple brick and mortars or multiple physical locations, dispatchable locations, we like to start seeing these split, okay? And normally we like to see the owner still owning this LLC as an S corporation, but then we see these single member LLCs, the single member being the parent S corporation, right? And each of these are for each individual location. We like to see this because now we have a veil between these LLCs. So if something would happen, God forbid, and you get sued, they can't touch the other location, right? We want to keep them separate for we want to limit our liability, right? That's why they're called LLCs. So this is how we like that structure to look. Now, when it comes down to how the back end accounting is for this is what we like to see. Okay. We like to have all of the shared costs come out of this parent S corporation. The owner's cost, right? Your sales team, not your on-site, but all your sales team. So now you have this central call center all coming out of the LLC. If you have a fractional CFO or a fractional chief marketing officer, your ops at the top, claims management and HR, right? If you're doing marketing that's going to each location, right? SEO would be a big one, or sometimes if you're doing like direct mail or things like that, sometimes you can segregate the costs out and those can come out of the individual locations because they're like defined, right? They're split. Insurance can come out of the top, software, right? And then all of those costs, so a lot of times we'll do it based on sales. All of those costs then get expensed to the individual companies who pay the S corporation back. And so the S corporation doesn't make any money, right? It spends $100,000 this month and it gets reimbursed, 70,000 from this location and 30,000 from this location because it's a little smaller, right? And so this is a $0 S corporation, but it's one tax return because these taxes just flow up, right? And so that's what we like to see with the parent. The last thing then,
and so that's the only reason to not have the profit at the very top, because you get to basically focus on just one tax return. Why not have location? Why not have profit flow to the parent company?
Because the parent
I know
company,
profit flows up. Why not have that where I'm charging an extra fee for marketing to location number one, where the LLC S corp parent company now has a profit?
Yeah, because we want to know what these locations individually do on their own, right? If we're charging them more money for management, well, I mean, that's just going to the owner's pocket. That should be a draw, right? That shouldn't be it's not an actual cost, right? And if you would ever decide you want to liquidate one of these and sell them, you want to understand truly how that's going to impact your costs.
Beautiful.
Right?
Great answer. Yeah.
That's my thought. That. Yeah. Last thing that I have then is, so what does each individual location pay for, right? Anything that is truly coming from that location should pay for. So when it comes to marketing, usually we see like SEO and things coming out of the parent, but then we'll see direct marketing or sponsorships or whatever potentially come out of these individuals. But then we'll see the crew payroll, the on-site estimator, an ops manager, if you're a dispatcher, whatever you have in that individual LLC. We'll see sometimes software, if you can segregate it out. Usually you can't. Usually it's better to have it at the parent because you get this economy of scale. Okay? Yeah. And so that's the whole idea of getting another location, is now we have this economy of scale. And so the whole idea of making all of these costs come out of this parent is because we want to understand that the larger we get, the less percentage of sale each of these become. And that's where the earnings are made. Right. So either way, when you're starting new locations, that's what we're looking for.
There's some good questions coming in. There's a
Okay.
couple I want to answer now. If I don't get to your question, we will answer it out at the end. But one of the things I do want to bring up here is we're still talking about dispatchable operations LLCs. And so I just want to bring that up because I want you to bring some insight and wisdom when we go to the next point here. But there is a question here. There's quality control. Ted, I'll get to your sales one because I think that's good at the end. But moverlead.com, what a beautiful way to advertise secretly. We operate they say we operate two separate moving companies in New Jersey and then are considering out of state expansion. How do we determine whether our current ops are truly scalable versus just locally successful?
Great question.
Yeah.
Great question.
At least on
well,
your side of things.
Yeah. So you should know what your profitability and earnings are of each individual location that you already have, right? And so the only time it makes sense to scale is if you add that new location, is it going to be more profitable than the current ones? If it's going to be less profitable, then something's broken, right? But if it's going to be more profitable because now you're going to have more sales for your call center, more leads coming in. And so therefore you can maybe even start ticking down your commission rates because people are making a lot more money because there's more leads now because there's more area where you're servicing, right? More leads coming in, more marketing. If you're able to continuously reduce your overhead as a percentage of sales with new locations, then you know that you're probably on point, right? A lot of times your margins aren't necessarily going to go up because you're still paying your crew, the same amount as a percentage of sales. You're still paying fuel costs the same amount as percentage of sales, damage claims, packing material. All those costs are still the same except for sales, which we put in COGS. But so your overhead should really be shrinking the more locations you have. Overhead as a percentage of sales. That's my thought.
Okay. That's great. Hopefully that answers your question. If there's some follow-up from there, we will get to the rest of the questions after. But you've shared a lot of great stuff, right? Here's how you structure the LLCs. Here's how you open a dispatchable operational location. Now, let's see how well I've trained you. What if you're sitting here going, man, that sounds great, but I have a problem. I still need to grow. I still need to scale, but I don't really have the ability to go forward a new dispatchable location in another area. What do they do? And then what is your insight to that?
Yeah. If that's the case, then you haven't conquered where you're at, right? You have to conquer where you're at. You have to figure out how to get more of the market share of where you're at. And a lot of that comes into, well, depending on how you're doing your marketing, right? But a lot of that comes into how can you rank higher in different areas where you're currently at. Let me say, it is much easier. I'm going to go back a couple slides. It's much easier and better to do more versus new, right? Where you're at with a physical location, if you can do more where you're at, then you should do
better.
More.
Which
Yes,
then
more
kind of
better.
begs to the question, which we talked about earlier, is a lot of the times you see this new location, dispatchable, when it's like separate new, like major city or state where you're talking about if you're in, let's say, the Vegas area, you're like, actually, maybe you keep one dispatchable location and just operate out of that to all the different other, potentially sales locations or just anywhere in that state or that city, correct?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah,
Okay.
if you can just win more at where you're at, that you should be doing that before you're trying to get to another location. Another location is not nearly as sexy as just one big location. It's much easier, much
more profitable.
Yeah, much more profitable, but inevitably you're going to hit certain caps, but if you're in these big cities, I mean, goodness gracious, you look at Brian Slater in Chicago, that dude was doing like, millions and tens, 20s millions in revenue out of one single location, multiple GMBs, right? But one single physical location. So that's there are massive scales that you can get into in these bigger locations. So I'll say
Okay.
that.
Great. Well, if you'd stop sharing your screen,
Yes.
Apparently I need to send a request. Send a
To
request.
stop sharing it.
There you go. I want to move into like what this physically looks like for everybody here. And I want to talk about then the Google Maps new location strategy. And I think it's important because what Brock talked about is so beneficial for growing. And even the concept is really beneficial. But we can do this to help you get growth right? You can do this to help get growth at potentially and I would argue, and I know you would agree, less costly, more efficient, faster profitability way to get you to the place where you can then buy another warehouse in another area because you have the profit and the growth. And so I want to share this with you. The big idea here, though, and I think this is really important, and I want you to hear this. And there are some people who are haters on this strategy, but you know what? I say let them hate, because I've seen this work way too many times to be concerned. The big idea is your Google Maps location. So when we say Google Maps, we're talking about a sales location. You open a new location that you're not operating out of, you're not dispatching out of. You open that up. The problem is your main location, there's a geographic problem. There's a geographic restriction. And I want to share with you what this is and then the way to solve this. This is an example right here in Vegas. This is one of the top dogs in Vegas, the most reviewed, the most reviewed company in Vegas, like top dog. Right? You would think, oh, they're going to take over Vegas with one location. Well, in terms of taking over Vegas, when it comes to realtor referral programs, connections, networking, postcards, truck signs, billboards, maybe you can. And I think that's great. But when it comes to SEO, when it comes to map rankings, you do not have that ability. And I think that's really real. This is Google Business Profile location number 1 for this company. They only get from, you can see they're right here in the middle where the number 1 is at. You can see very quickly, just a mile and a half, 2 miles over to the right, they're 9th spot for keywords like movers, moving company, movers near me. 9th spot, they're not even on the top map pack. But right here where they're located, they're number 1. Then you can go see out here as they get less, there's less competition. They reach all the way down into Summerlin. That's your location potentially that you're sitting at. I know a lot of you guys raised your hands that you don't have multiple locations. This is where you're sitting at today. Now, you've got to dominate your first location for whatever visibility Google will allow. That's where companies like us come in to go, here's what Google will allow. Is it time to expand to a new location, or is it time to double down and get the growth you need in location number 1? I want to go through what this looks like here. The Google Business Profile only ranks within a limited radius of your physical location. You could go try to find somebody that ranks all of a metropolitan city and prove it to me that it doesn't happen, because it doesn't happen. Because there's so much competition, Google will limit that. So the further the searcher is, right, grandma going to your searching for movers near me, the further they are from your Google Business location, the worse you're going to rank, no matter how good your SEO is, how good your brand is. You go back here, this brand is one of the best brands in Vegas, and they're not ranking all over Vegas. So one location, you get this small circle of visibility. So if you want to dominate a market, and we're talking about within one major metropolitan city, one location will never be enough. Now, here's what I don't want you to do. I don't want you to go open a ton of locations, because Brock and I talked about this just today. You need cash flow. You need reviews. We're going to go into that later on. You have things that you need to build up, and you cannot expand well into new locations if your main location isn't dominating already, because your brand needs to do a good job and bring value in the eyes of Google. So the strategy here is then you can open multiple or additional Google Business Profile locations, spread, keyword here, strategically across the city. And these don't need to be what Brock talked about, the full warehouses. It can be a sales office, right? And when we put the quotes of a sales office, it is, in all intents and purposes, a real office. You have to prove to Google there's signage, there's computers, there's an ability for somebody to work there. You can do business out of there. Google needs to see it and believe it. That's the whole verification process. And you create that, but no one has to technically work out of there. In fact, this is secret. I know people who have done that, gotten verified, and then have released that out to somebody else and just said, hey, in case I get suspended, I'm going to need this back for a couple days. And they just release this out. So there's really cool strategies to create more profit in this. But each new location creates a new ranking radius, expands your map coverage, and the goal is to tile the entire metro area with this overlapping of visibility with these sales locations. Now, let me show you what this looks like. Here is their Google Business Profile number 1 right here. This is their visibility. You can see they get some visibility down to Summerlin, even though they're in the northwest of Vegas, but they lose visibility going to the right. All right, but notice how in Spring Valley down here, which by the way is a great area in Vegas, down here, they're not going to be found. Grandma searching movers near me or moving company is not going to find this moving company in the maps. A family of 5 moving to California ain't going to find this company. So what do you have to do? This company, well, what they did is they opened up Google Business Profile number 2. Now, number 2, you can see now they've gotten rankings, 1, 2s. Think green. Green equals money. The more or the less green it is, the less visibility you have, the less money you'll make. So you'll see now in that Henderson area and the surrounding 5-6 mile radius, they're ranking really well. Movers near me, moving company, long distance movers. So just like that with the second location, you got all this new visibility. You can, in some sense, double your lead flow with another location, double your sales with another location in extreme cases. Then what did they do? They opened up Google Business Profile number 3. Now look, you can see now they're in Spring Valley. So now when grandma searches or the 5-bedroom family home searches, they're in Spring Valley, and now they show up with their new Google Business Profile. So what does that do? The number 1 location, the original location, was not able to rank all in Vegas. You combined all 3, you can look at how much they dominate Vegas when somebody is searching movers near me, moving company, movers, etc. Now, if this moving company is listening to me right now, oh my gosh, it's time to get a North Las Vegas. It's time to get a North Las Vegas because I know they can get reviews because I've seen them. That would be a full domination of the city. That would be a strategic move when it comes to marketing and growth. So I want to go through some of this. There are constraints. Brock talked about constraints on a physical location. I want to talk about restraints on a sales location. Number 1, reviews. Every new location starts at 0. It starts at 0 in rankings. It starts at 0 in reviews. And you need competitive reviews that help you rank. That's one offer or one thing. But more importantly, you need competitive reviews. So when someone Googles you and finds you, they get this built trust to go, I'm going to call this company. I'm going to go get a quote. And you have to look at your competitors. Imagine if you have 45 reviews and the 3 or 4 companies around you have 500 reviews, 5 stars. Everyone's got 5 stars. It is going to be harder when somebody sees your location to call you than to call the other companies. And so you must get to a competitive level when it comes to reviews. So you can't just go open these locations if you don't have enough reviews. You got to build these reviews. So you got to go open the new location, get reviews going before you even spend a dime, right? And so that's why picking a strategic location is important. You've got to also have a cost per location of about $300 or $1,000 a month. You go rent out a shared office space is like the sweet spot. The most ideal location in the eyes of Google is a warehouse, what Brock is talking about earlier. It's a full-on dispatchable warehouse. That's the most ideal. But the name of the game is to play the game with Google, and we can get real locations out of shared office spaces, and they're way more affordable, way cheaper, and you can sometimes just sublease that back out to mitigate that cash cost to you. But you do have to prepare for that kind of expense. Then you look at, let's say, SEO management, that's $500 to $1,500. And then you really do have to get an LLC formation most of the time. You've got to go through the Google verification process. That takes time and effort. So like Brock said, this is a capital and patience game. You can't just go open 5 locations overnight because you need reviews, and reviews take time. You need that ability. But when you scale, when you get these multiple locations, your SEO, ships rise on a rising tide. All ships rise on a rising tide, right? Is that the saying? Right? When you do this multiple
A rising tide floats all boats, right?
There it is. When you do these multiple locations, in the eyes of Google, you're a more valuable, more trustworthy business. So there is a competitive advantage to putting this into your marketing plan in the next 12, 6, 18 months. So all this is very real. We won't go into this because we are starting to run low on time and I want to get to the questions, but this is real. You have to create a real location. So if the location ever gets suspended, you're going to go through all the hard work to get it up. If it ever gets suspended, you need to be able to have owners access to the GBP. You need to be able to have a walkthrough video. You need to be able to show some kind of utility or some kind of bill, some lease agreement that must match the Google Business Profile address and suite number, registration, potentially sometimes live on the state business, interior photos, exterior photos. Like, you have to have a lot. So this is not necessarily easy, but I would argue, Brock, one of the benefits if you are expanding within your city is it's actually, even though that's a lot, it's way easier than getting a whole new office, let's say, or a whole new dispatch location.
100%. 100%.
So that's,
People don't realize how big they can scale on one location. It's usually downplayed.
Yeah, one physical dispatching operation location, you can actually get very, very big. So that is the crux of what we're going to talk about. We have some questions. I got to do this. I'm so sorry. But if you're like, I kind of want to learn more about that location strategy, chapter 5 in the book, Movers Marketing, chapter 5 opens on this and goes through this entire segment of how to look at this and how to see how to do this side. So that's what that is. Brock, this was amazing. I think the LLCs, I don't like taxes. I don't like LLC structures. It just feels like weight to me to have to worry about, because I want to scale, I want to grow. But it's so important because of that liability, because of your finances, and you have to have clear finances because you have to have clear profitability. If not, you're just in a hamster wheel.
Well, and especially if you're looking to grow, like that previous question we were talking about, you have to understand, what is a more beneficial lower overhead expense ratio? Like, what is that? If you don't have everything lined up, if you don't have the accounting right, if you're not looking at the reports, you don't know. You don't know if it's actually going to be beneficial or not. So
yeah. Well, let's go through some questions. I will say, if you guys are like, man, I want to hear more from Brock, right? And I kind of want to see him because he's a good looking dude. Then go on to rotedigital.com/webinars and go and look at January 2025. And he did one of our most popular webinars. It was all on P&Ls, what to look at, what metrics to see, how to set up the P&L. It's beautiful. And if this is on YouTube, there's got to be a link that comes up here where they can click on it and go watch it. But it is a very great video and a great content. So thank you for that. Well, let's go into some questions here. Ted. Oh, Ted, I'm surprised he's here and not fishing, but let's go. Bringing on a new salesperson, new sales, how much should you increase your marketing? Where should you bring on 1 to 2 salesperson to support revenue? I'd actually like, Brock, you to answer that when it comes to what you're looking at on a P&L and financial side of things.
Yep. So we really we try to allocate 7% of total revenue to go to sales, right? And that's fully burdened. To what us fully burdened is workers' comp is nothing. So really it's just the sales payroll and the taxes associated with that, 7.65%, right? FICA. And so really, the idea of growing a salesman comes down to, can 7% of your revenue be split between another salesperson, right? And that goes back to that, the peak and valley of growing, right? It's really tough to grow slow, because if you do $1 million, and maybe you can do, let's say you do $1.5 million and you can do it all with one salesman, right? And you maybe as the owner, and then you go to 1.8 and you need more than one person, but maybe not 2 people. That's where your margins or your overhead really can get hit, right? And that's that peak in that valley. So I like to say, I don't want to spend more than 7, maybe 8% of total revenue going to sales, and then focus on scaling the revenue that now those 2 salesmen get to split the commission of, if that makes sense.
And I want to bring up some points on the things that I've seen. Number one, when you get to that place where maybe you need another person, but not just 2, and you're not going to scale fast, right? Or maybe scaling fast didn't work, and you're like, I'm going to just have a slow growth. That's where then hiring more like part-time people to answer the phone, to do the sales, a separate vendor to do that. And I would even argue here, the type of salesperson you're talking about, Ted, here is very important. If I am a moving owner, and I know I'm not a moving owner, and so that gives me some disqualification here, but if I'm a moving owner, there's a very big difference between bringing an inbound salesperson here versus bringing an outbound salesperson. An outbound salesperson, you have the ability to kind of bring in, and they have to go generate revenue. They have to go network. They have to go know people and get into contact with people and build that yourself. Now, you're going to pay for that more hefty in the commission, but you're building your future pipeline, you're building your future referrals. And so an outbound salesperson could be, would you argue, a little different, or would you still only include that and say, like, I guess in my mind, I don't necessarily need as much marketing if I'm going to bring an outbound salesperson in.
That's true. It really all just comes down to how much are we spending? How much can we spend, right? There's only a finite amount of revenue that we have. And obviously, the more revenue we have, the more we get to spend, right? But there's a finite amount of revenue that we have where we're at. And the more that we're giving away to our salesmen, the more that's eating into our earnings. And so you really have to be strategic on your marketing spend and when you're hiring as well. And then that is also, I'll finish with this. That is also where sometimes the seasonality can play into your favor, right? Because if you're looking to hire somebody, you bring them on now or March, right? April maybe, so that you can have some time, so that when they truly come on and they do go full commission, they're in the midst of summer. And now you have the next 6 months to really grow your company 10, 20, 30% based on your marketing spend.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Next question. How do we prevent quality control from dropping when you are no longer physically present at every job? Now, I'm going to give some guarding on this. The easy answer is SOP. I get that. But I think most owners would agree with me. SOPs aren't the end all be all. It's easy to build an SOP. It's hard to train. It's hard to make sure that operationally gets executed. So based off your insight, you've owned a moving company. You own a moving company. I can't remember, Brock.
Owned and sold, basically. Yeah.
Owned and sold. So you get the ability to speak into this. I feel like I can't because I've never owned one. So walk through like what you're thinking through on that.
Yeah. As an owner, as you begin to step out of some of the day-to-day stuff, right? You start to heavily focus on hitting certain metrics, right? Scorecards. I'm a huge scorecard guy. I'm a huge EOS guy. And the reason is because it's the only possible way for you to trust and verify, okay? Because nobody's ever going to be as sold in your company as you are, right? And so the idea is we track everything, and the metrics need to equal whatever the result is. Okay. And so I'm going to incentivize whatever I need to happen. And that also comes down to, as you begin expanding, who are you putting into the role to monitor that specific location, right? That gets very difficult because you got to find the right person. But not only do you have to find the right person, it's up to you as the entrepreneur to make sure that person, you're trusting but verifying, make sure that person is doing what they need to be doing and tracking the right things, right? To help with that. And I do know this is where a lot of people start using virtual administrators to track a lot of these things, to track individual crewman reviews and things like that, review bonuses. I got a lot of companies that are very successful paying a ton of money in review bonuses, right? Because we just talked about how important those 5-star reviews are, right? Yep. So I digress to say tracking twice as much as you think you have to track.
Yeah. And I think as you're smaller, not that the data doesn't matter as much, but it's not as, you can't leverage it as much. And as you grow, the data becomes so much more important. And at Rotate Digital, we actually built out an entire data ROI team because I was basically like, at this point, I don't want to rely on our clients to have to go hire a virtual assistant to know what to look for. We're just going to know all their data, all their sales metrics so well that then we can report off that. And I think that's really important to go. Leveraging the data as you grow becomes more and more important. That's why you get guys like Ready Rolls who are helping you find these data, whatever he calls them, data people.
Activator, yeah.
Data activator, right? To help you because it now becomes more important as you get bigger. But when you're smaller, you don't need it as much because you don't get as much leverage out of it. Okay. Well, we digressed on that one, but great answer. Next question is, what expansion mistakes most often kill margins in year one?
Yeah. Okay. It's overhead. 100% it's overhead. It's not necessarily margins, right? I usually don't see margins change too much because usually the guys are unless you're going across the country, right? Which I don't recommend, but usually
Florida. Everyone wants to go to Florida, bro.
Everybody wants to go to Florida. Again, I'm specifically talking about expanding into different brick and mortar, dispatchable locations, let's say. As you get into more of those, usually the margin is relatively the same, but where people really get hurt is their overhead grows. And that's the opposite of the solution that another location is attempting to solve, which is reducing overhead as sales grows, right? So a lot of times I'll see someone think that they need to put a franchisee owner as the master of this new location. And it just is that's where I think a lot of franchises break down. Is that person wants to act as an owner, so therefore they want to take a lot of money, more than what you can potentially hire somebody to just do dispatch from, right? And so a lot of times what I'll see whenever somebody opens a new location and they start getting hurt is because they get somebody in there, they pay them a lot of money, and yeah, they might be okay, but it doesn't require that level of person, right? It requires somebody to be able to do dispatch. Everything else should be handled from an administrative perspective in your parent company, right, or your main company. It should be somebody that's doing dispatch and maybe an on-site estimator, right? That's usually what we recommend.
I love that. I'm gonna push a little bit on this one. You talked about bringing in somebody else. I have had an experience, at least in my company, where it feels like bringing on amazing people makes everything so much easier. Now, if I'm a moving owner, I'm going to just pretend I'm going to put myself in the shoes. I would almost rather go as long and as hard, burning myself out to grow the revenue and grow that, to instead of just hiring some small, like, brand new noob GM, right, to run a location for me, and because he's cheap and he's new, I'd rather build it as message as I can to potentially take a lot more or less profit in, let's say, year one by hiring like an A-star player, right? Because it feels like the more people, more problems. More people, it's very hard to make sure that they have all the right outcomes clear. What are your thoughts on that? Is that like, no, I'd rather you figure out what you can pay in market wage and just find there? Or is there a value of like getting an A-star player who can create outcomes, even if it takes a small loss of profitability?
Well, you have to think of what that person's doing in the new location, right? They're not in control of marketing. They're not in control of major administrative costs. They're not in control of a sales team, right? They're not in control of they're not in control of very much, right? They're doing dispatch, and because it's not a franchise, right? A franchise, you're an owner, like you're going in, you're running this whole thing, right? Which I think is some of the downside to franchises. But when you're opening a new location, you need somebody that can go in there, that's, you're not going to be robbing, stealing from you, but that can do the basics well. You don't need a C-suite level employee. Your C-suite level employees stay back at the main office and facilitate the oversight of these people, right?
Yeah.
Not you don't have a C-suite level person in that location.
And I would argue most people, most moving owners, at least generally in the ecosystem that we're talking to often, most moving owners shouldn't and can't even afford C-level. That's why they go fractional. They go to Rotate Digital for fractional CMO work. They go to Brock for fractional CFO work. That's a more efficient leverage of their money use. Yes, no?
100%. 100%.
Yeah. Of course you're biased to say that.
Of course.
I'm biased, right? All right, let's go. It looks like the last question. So we're going to be ending things up here soon. We're going to answer this question, and then we've got a request from you guys, and then we'll wrap it up if there's no more questions. It says, dumb question. First off, no dumb question. I'm not a fan of dumb questions. I'm a fan of all questions. If you opened a sales location with Google, if you open a sales location, will Google require it to have a different contact information? Also, if you open a second sales location and customers from that area leave reviews in that review, doesn't that hurt your current location to have those reviews, or are you able to keep up with multiple Yes, great question. This is why it's so important. First of all, not a dumb question. That's a great question.
Great question. Yeah.
Yeah. This is why it is so important for you to understand what your business can handle. If you do not have the ability to get reviews often and swiftly, then the delay of getting that Google business profile to start getting your return is longer. If you open up multiple locations at once and you don't have that ability to get reviews quick, you would have to spread them thin, and you're shotgunning and you're getting no major needle moving activity in any one of them. And so I say all that to go, one, it doesn't hurt your main business. And here's why. Those reviews that would normally come to your main business, you just spit those out on your Smart Moving Link or Chariot or Supermove or whatever. You just spit those out to the new location. It's totally fine. It does not matter. It's still a real, transparent, authentic review. You spit those over there. Now, the reason why I say it's fine is because if you're doing this the right way, I would argue the Rotate Digital way, then what that means is you're already dominating that current location. You already have a good amount of reviews. Now, of course, we'll want to sprinkle a few reviews back into that, but the goal is to go get that 40, 50, 60 reviews in less than a month. Now, if it takes 2, 3, 4 months, that's fine, but just know you shouldn't be spending SEO money on that if it's going to take that long. And so your cost and your overhead is going to be on that rental office And so to get up to speed in 4 to 6 months, if you're spending $500 a month, you're talking about, $3,000 invested before you can even get some kind of return on investment or attempt to get the return on investment. So to answer your question, it does not hurt your Google business profile main location, because if you're doing it the right Rotate Digital way, then you are getting that location to a very good spot first. And then, yeah, you want to make sure that you can, I would focus on one location at a time. Get up the reviews to a competitive amount of reviews. Some cities, a competitive amount of reviews is 300. Some cities, it's 90 reviews, and that's all you need. And so we have to look at that, because the more reviews, the more you can be on the top reviewed company, the more return you're going to get. Even if your visibility on that Google business profile is good, if you're one of the lower reviews, your return will still be lower, just naturally, because people will trust the company with more reviews. So I hope that answered the question. That's it. Do you guys have any last questions? Brock, thank you for being here today.
Yeah,
I
it's
appreciate
always
you
fun, man.
in tax season, nonetheless. Everyone give a thank you to Brock. If you are have enjoyed the time, if you feel like Brock has brought value to you today, give him some encouragement, because anytime I ask him to come on and do a webinar, he always says, well, how many thank yous did I get at the end of the webinar? So I need you to put some thank yous, everybody, to let Brock know this was very, very wonderful, and that he is a valued person in this community. We've got some good
Thank you.
This is amazing. I really do appreciate you doing it. You are a wealth of information, and I really struggle with it because you talk so eloquently. I'm like jibber jabbering all over the place. I can't get sayings right. Tides, boats, they all float, something like that. And you're eloquent, and I love that
Thank
of you.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Trev. It's always a good time, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah. If you guys can do us a favor here, this would mean a whole ton to us as we help you and we bring this knowledge. If you could go to Google and look up Rotate Digital and Pro Mover Accounting, right? Did I say that right? Sometimes I switch the accounting first.
No, you're good.
Look up Rotate Digital and look at Pro Mover Accounting. Kyle Pearson looks like he got this right here. Go leave us a 5-star review and say that we are a ton of value to the moving industry, and the webinars we do are valuable. Be authentic, please. But that would really help our businesses. It'd really help encourage us. So if you could just take 2 minutes, leave a quick review. It doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be perfect. Voice text that bad boy. I know Brock would be super grateful for that.
Yes,
I would be super grateful for that. And so, yeah, that's it. We've got no other questions. Thank you guys so very much for being here. We've got a big lineup coming in 2026. We've got some amazing people on the books that I'm not going to share just yet. But please, please, please stay tuned. Fill out on rotadigital.com/webinars. Put in your information so you get notified. And we will see you at the next one. Don't be a cuckoo machuku and miss the next one. Brock, thank you. We'll see ya.
Thank you, guys. Yeah.
We'll see you guys. Bye.